Hi, I'm John Ford. Welcome to the series on writing great leads. We're going to go through in our sessions, we're going to talk about sales leads on top of promotional copy, why they're so important, what the different types of leads are, and how you can figure out which leads you want to use at which times for which audiences. But we'd like to start out by talking about a concept called the power of one. And before we do that, I'd like to introduce myself, just so you know a little bit about me. I've been a copywriter now for about 23 years. Was a co-author with Michael Masterson on the book, Great Leads. And I've written for several different industries, mostly in the information industry, for financial, travel, health. And I've also been the editor the last 14 years for an e-letter called the Copywriters Roundtable. So why so much focus on leads in sales copy? After all, it tends to be a very small part of the sales letter that you're writing, but it has an outsized impact on the results of that sales letter. There's a famous concept of a gentleman from Italy, they call it the Pareto principle. He was a farmer who was figuring out that his fields, his crops, had 20% of his crops were responsible for about 80% of his yields, and he realized that this 80-20 ratio applied for many different things. And this is true for the lead. It's roughly about 20% of the sales letter that you're going to write, but it has such a big impact on the results because it sits out there at the front. It grabs people's attention. It is the thing that determines in that moment whether or not they're going to read on for the rest of the promotion. It also, as you'll see as we go through, it sets the pace for everything that you're about to do in the sales letter. So through the series, we're going to keep revisiting this reason for this importance. We'll talk about how to figure out what it is that your buyers know and why you're going to address them in a certain way in your lead, depending on what it is that they know. We're going to talk about the kinds of things that can make copy fail directly connected to what's in the lead. And we've isolated 6 categories of types of leads that generally describe what you're going to do in a sales letter. So what does it mean when we talk about the lead? People want to know, how long is a lead supposed to be? A lead tends to be, when we think of a lead, it's usually the headline that's going to be up at the top of the page, and maybe some subtext under the headline, and then that part of the beginning of the sales letter where you get to the moment of commitment, where the person is ready to go on and read the rest of what you are about to say. So that can be a very short distance from the headline, it can be a very long distance, and it's going to depend on several factors that we'll cover. So as an example, one of the types of leads we're going to look at is something called an offer lead. And very often an offer lead is something very simple, very short. Other times you might need to get into some concepts that are richer or more abstract to the person that you are writing to. And those tend to be a little bit longer. They need to do a little bit more in that lead. And we will address what those differences are. So we're going to talk about all different kinds of leads throughout this series, from the most simple, one of which is an offer lead and tends to be very short, to things that are a little bit more in-depth and complex and take a little bit more finesse and time and are used in a different situation. But let's go back and talk about this specific idea of the power of one. You might be familiar with something that the great ad man David Ogilvy said about advertisements, what makes them great or not great. To him, the core concept that makes an ad really work is something he called the big idea. And he would say that most of the ads that were out there, presumably the ones that he didn't write, were not using a big idea. They didn't express a big idea. And I believe the expression that he said was that an ad without a big idea is as effective as a ship passing in the night, which is to say, not at all. So part of what this idea of the power of one is understanding the power that a big idea can have and how to then express that idea in a way that's going to make the most connection. And this is where this important point of the power of one comes into play. The power of one is about, and we'll look at this more in depth in just a second, but it's about talking about an idea with one direct approach, the most refined approach where it's neither too little or too much said about that one idea to get it to come across instantly. So one good way to think about this is to think about some of the best sellers that have been out there that you see on the business list and things like that. For instance, there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell that came out some time ago called The Tipping Point. The Tipping Point is specifically about how a trend reaches up to the moment when that trend is about to explode. The entire book is about that concept, but everything in the book relates back to that one big idea. So there's a richness to the idea, and at the same time, the scope of it is instantly appealing and absorbable. Or the famous Stephen Covey book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. In that book, there's nothing in that title that makes it ambiguous as to what that is about. Everything in the book is going to point back to what highly effective people do to be successful, even though there are many different nuances and things that he talks about in the text. Or one of the best sellers of all time is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. There's no doubt in your mind what that book is going to be about, even though he goes on to tell many different stories and many different approaches to winning friends and influencing people. The concept is right there up in the front. So in that title of that book and in the introduction, you have no doubt about what the rest of that book is going to be. It sets the pace for everything that's going to follow. So how do you get this perfect crafting of an idea so that it is absorbable like this and also has this kind of gravitas or importance so that it feels big, as David Ogilvy would say? One of the things that is, I don't know if you'd say it's ironic about it, is that doing less is often going to be more. So, for instance, you see here, these are two ads for cigar bars that happen to be down in Delray Beach, where AWI has its headquarters. And this particular one has more or less thrown in everything. This is a kitchen sink approach to advertising this cigar bar. No one of these points on here is actually a bad thing. It's nice that they have Wi-Fi and wide flat screen TVs and pool tables and things like that. You would think of those as good selling points, but there's so much on this page that you're not sure what to look at. What is the thing that they want to feature as their greatest feature? What's the thing that's important about them? The other one is far more simple. You don't really need to say that much about a cigar bar to let people know what a cigar bar is. And a certain kind of audience likes to go to cigar bars and have a certain kind of experience. My guess is that the latter one, where less is being said, is much closer to the main feeling that those people want to go when they go to a cigar bar. Have it be kind of a swanky place where they can be cool, and probably people like that are hanging out at the cigar bar. So here is another good example of this less is more and one good idea being expressed. This is a Gene Schwartz ad that he did, I believe it was for the Bates method of exercises that you could do for your eyes to improve your eyesight. Your eyes can heal themselves. Is there any doubt in your mind what that advertisement is about? Immediately, it hits you that this is what it's about, and it goes on in the lead up here to elaborate on that concept, that your eyes can actually, you can improve your vision without needing extra thick glasses, without needing any kind of special supplements or vitamins or drugs or anything else. So you can do this all on your own. So it sets that up so that the rest of the ad is going to be all about that and never deviates from that. So somebody can look at that and they immediately know, if I've got glasses and I wish I didn't, I have to read this thing. So another important aspect of this big idea that works and getting down to that one expression of the idea is that you have to choose an emotion to target. We know that whenever you sell anything to anybody, we like to think that it's our intellect that is making the choice to make a purchase. But the truth is, we're far more emotional beings than we are intellectual, logical beings. So the emotions precede the logic. We make a choice based on how we feel about something. When you write to a customer, how do you choose what emotion that it is you're going to target if you have one choice to make? You have to know what emotion is already dominant in that person that you're writing to. So you can't make them feel something. You have to find out what they feel, and then you have to direct your message at that. So making that choice, which one emotion to direct toward, is another thing that helps you craft and refine this power of one big idea. Another way to get a big idea across, we'll look at a very specific kind of lead called a story lead a bit later in the series, but we are, the interesting thing about people is that we are compelled by stories. Every way that we transmit information to people comes via a story, where in history is just the progression of stories that we use to pass down knowledge of experience and events. So we tend to react very well to stories. Products often have a creation story or a story about somebody using it or a story that helps get that idea across too. So the story becomes a vehicle for that one idea. So when you have the one idea you want to express, what's the context that you're going to express it to people in? You also need to know why you are putting that idea out there for the people that you are addressing. So what purpose do you want, what do you want to have happen once they experience your lead? So at the very beginning, you have to know it's like somebody telling a joke. You have to know what the punchline is because you have to set it up in the front. And you want to make sure that you say no more or no less than you need to say to set up that punchline. So know what that inevitable response is that you want to have happen. It also has to be an idea that's big enough to stir interest. Now, what does that mean for an idea to be big enough to stir interest? An idea of something that is a small, like a trifling concept, people might not be interested in talking about. It's like a chit-chat about the weather or something that you don't necessarily want to get into. But here, if you put something across that's really not consequential to somebody's day, they're not going to have an instant reaction to it, or they're not going to be able to spare it the time or the mental energy to dig deeper into it with you. You also want to make sure, though, that it's not too large. The idea has to be just big enough, because if it's too large, you're going to have a hard time wrestling that idea down on the page. You're going to have a hard time moving from that idea to the product. And you're going to have a hard time keeping your message tight enough and short enough that the people are going to be able to stick with you while you express it. It also has to be an idea that's easy to understand. And that's not because your target audience is not smart. It's because your target audience, like you, doesn't have unlimited time. They don't have unlimited energy. So you have to find a way to get that idea to them very quickly, because you only have microseconds to convince them that they want to listen to you. And it also has to be, and this is very important, it has to be something that's immediately relevant to the people that you're addressing. And how do you figure out if an idea is relevant? Well, certainly it could be relevant in the context of things that are going on in the world at the time that you make the pitch. You want to have good timing for it. But it also has to be relevant in the timing of that person's life. What's going on in their lives? What do they need from you? So what is relevant to them is going to be the thing that's useful to them. They're going to want to listen to you if they feel like there's going to be some benefit from giving you that time, because they know that it's a trade-off. So it has to be something that is relevant to that person. We'll talk more about figuring out how to make that relevant in one of the next sessions. But for now, you just have to realize that if you don't find the thing that's relevant, then the big idea will just fall like a lead balloon. Okay, so for this session, I want you to stop after this is over and do some exercises. So one of the first things we want you to do is to go out and find two pieces of mail for a sales piece, online and in print, and then go through and see if you can identify what is that core big idea and how is that crafted what is the one message that they're trying to get across. And don't just do it in the lead. Go through the body of the copy and see where they return to that, because as we said, the lead sets that pace. So you need to go back and reiterate that throughout. And that's why it's so critical that you set it up right at the beginning, because you have to know what you're going to revisit. And then write that down, what that big idea is, and see if you feel like that idea expresses something that would grab a customer or not grab a customer. See if you feel like it's big enough or too small or too muddy. And then see if you can find out how well that sales letter performed, because often you'll find if the big idea is well done and if the message is focusing on one thing that's easily absorbed, that sales letter will have been more successful most times, more times than not. So congratulations for joining this class, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the sessions. So in the next session, we're going to talk about a concept called prospect awareness, and also about indirect versus direct leads and how those two relate to each other. So thank you for joining us for this series, and I'll see you in the next session.